like words. This is good. Because that's who I was my whole life. And I've kind of reinvented myself 3 times as a writer. And I didn't mean to become a writer. I think my whole life people were telling me I was a writer, and I was like, I don't think so. And I finally one day said, well, let's try it and see who's right and who's wrong. And it was actually more even out of necessity that I started writing. I was married for a long time, and I got divorced 7 years ago, and I didn't have a career. I had been home with the kids. I taught a little bit here and there in high school, and I decided I really wanted to do something creative during my whole divorce. It was like this thing that I just needed to put my energy into something. We were still living in the same house together for 6 months, so it was like, okay, what am I gonna do? And I started writing a book for my middle school age child, and it was a book about soccer, and it was gonna be an illustrated book, even though I didn't draw. I was like, I'm gonna hire an illustrator. This is gonna be like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and I'm just gonna pour my heart into it. And I did, and it was amazing. I did a whole Kickstarter campaign to raise money to pay the illustrator. I did like, I raised money to do marketing. I got on social media. I kind of was like, boom, 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 just like learning as I went. And I raised $15,000 in 30 days. Not bad for someone who didn't know anything about any of this stuff. And it was great, but by the end I was like exhausted. I was like, I can't, I'm just gonna get these copies of these books to the people who donated and then just move on with my life. I need to get a job, I need work. But, so here's the thing. So I took that one step forward to kind of see if I could write, and I figured out I actually could write a book. And then when I finally had to figure out, okay, what else can I do? I decided I'm gonna start an LLC. It's gonna be called Emerson, which is my last name, Ink, I-N-K. And I wasn't sure why. I was like, I don't know, but it sounds official, so I'm just gonna do that. It felt good. And so I needed the domain name, and somebody had it. And I thought, well, that's great. Now I'm gonna have to make up some weird website name and go with that. And then a friend of mine said, well, see if you can buy it from whoever owns it. And I thought, okay. So I contacted the woman. She was a woman out on the West Coast. She lived on one of the islands in Washington State, and she had a copywriting business, and it was called Emerson Ink. And she said, well, instead of buying the domain for me, why don't we go into business together? And I was like, I couldn't believe she thought that would work. I mean, I had no proof. I had never done copywriting for anybody, but she'd kind of seen, I don't know if she'd seen like Facebook posts I'd written or something, and she was like, she just took a hunch on me. Like, she basically just was like, I'm just gonna take this risk. And the thing is, that was a point in my life where I was like, I had nothing to lose. There was no plan B. So I said, okay, let's do this. And she taught me everything she knew about copywriting. Our tagline was, we write words for folks who give a damn, because we wanted to write for B Corps and foundations and people who were making a positive impact in the world. That was our little thing. We did it. We plugged away. I was basically, I didn't know what I was doing or what I was talking about, but she put me in front of the camera, or we did Zoom calls. Back then that was like a newer thing. And we would do these Zoom calls, and she would kind of just like write notes, and I would just read them and talk to the client, because she was very camera shy and I wasn't. So it worked for a while, but she always said to me, she said, Salwa, you're not a copywriter, you're a writer. Again, like, I keep hearing people telling me this, and I'm like, okay. And I'm like, but what am I gonna do with that? How do I make money as a writer? Like, I can't just go and write a book and then sell it. Like, I realized that with the Kickstarter campaign, that's not gonna work. So I thought about it, and then out of the blue, this kid from high school, who actually Richie knows, because we all went to school together, he Facebook messaged me, and he said, do you know anyone who could write a book for my dad? And he wasn't asking me. He just said, do you know anyone? Because I know, like, in high school you like to write and blah. And I was like, can do it. And I don't know, I like heard myself say it. I was like, I guess I can. We'll see. And the bigger question was, he said, well, how much would you charge? And I had no idea. Like, no idea what. I didn't even know what the term ghostwriter was. So I didn't even know what to look up. But here's the thing. If I had asked a friend, I know she would have said, and I hate to say this, but if I had asked a girlfriend, she would have said, oh, let's look up the per word rate and see what you should charge, what everyone else is charging. Like, that's the logical thing to do. But instead, I asked my male entrepreneur friend, what would you charge? And he said, whatever the hell you want to charge. That's what I would charge if I were you. And I was like, what? It was like a new way of thinking. I didn't know that I could actually ask for what I wanted and what I thought I was worth. And I ended up charging. How much do you think I ended up charging for a book?
10,000.
10,000? What about, what, 50? I ended up charging over $100,000 to write a memoir for this guy's aging father for a Christmas present. Okay. And he paid me in cash. And I went and bought a safe. And I installed it in my room, and I paid all my rent that year in cash. People probably were wondering, what is this lady really doing? But, and I thought, and I had my 10-year-old son count it, the one I wrote the book for. And I was like, we were just sitting there counting money, and it was such an amazing, empowering moment for everyone and the whole family, really. And I mean, that year I actually ended up earning more than my husband, who had a 20-year career. So it was interesting, and I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. This is actually what I can do. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, and so the first step was finding someone who could teach me, right? So I hired an editor, and I found her on LinkedIn, and I hired her, and she ended up becoming my mentor. She had been a ghostwriter for 25 years. She knew everything. She taught me how to get a chapter out of a 90-minute phone call from somebody. She taught me how to write a book in 4 to 6 months. She taught me like the 4 P's of the intro and what you need. You need the problem, you need the promise, you need the prescription, and the proof. Like, she taught me the formulas, the tricks that I needed. And before I knew it, week after week, I wrote the chapters, and I would send them to her. I would send them to Bonnie to edit, because I was so scared I was doing something wrong. And then I would submit it to my client. But it was the best way. I learned as I went. I got paid to learn how to write a book. And then I did that again. And then I figured out, okay, how am I gonna scale this? Like, it's one thing to like find somebody who wants you to write a book, but it's another thing to find another person who wants you to write a book, and another person. So that was like the trick that I would have to eventually learn how to do. But that's the first part of my story, as far as like discovering who I was as a writer. And now, just to kind of fast forward a little bit and give you a little bit of a perspective, now I'm actually now I'm figuring out, how do I actually become an author? How do I actually write my own stuff and create my own author platform, which is very, very different. But that's a whole other set of skills and lessons and stories to talk about. But that's kind of the beginning. I don't know if you want me to go further, if you want to ask questions, if you want to talk, or.
Let's do this. Why don't I come up here with you? We'll talk, and
Okay.
people can ask. We'll just jump right in with questions, and then that may lead to some conversation between us
Okay.
about what is going on.
Yeah,
So
that
why don't we
sounds
do
great.
that?
Can I ask one?
Please do. Yeah. Why don't we set up some chairs here and you ask a question?
You were talking about some of the tips and tricks, the 4 Ps and things like
Yeah.
that. When you were actually writing, how much do you feel is like almost like a mechanical type process? If you just have to put the pieces in order, as opposed to, I don't want to say like you need inspiration to do something. Is it more of just putting blocks together, or is it you need to actually carve blocks to put into certain?
That's a good question. I think the way to answer that is to talk about what's the most important thing when you're writing a book? You're not thinking about the writer or even the subject matter. You're thinking about the reader, right? So that's the thing. Like you're trying to figure out, what does the reader need to learn in this chapter, and how are we going to get there? How are we going to get from point A to point B, right? And the way that I always like to begin chapters is with a story. The story that has all the lessons in it. And then you pull apart the story and kind of, that's where you get your points. And sometimes, like when you're doing a prescriptive nonfiction, a great way to end the chapter is, it sounds formulaic, but it works, right? Formulas work. So is to end it with some bullet points to kind of like, summarize what was done in the chapter. So that's the formula. It's like story, points, and then bullet points to summarize the points. So that's kind of the general formula I learned from her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you could tell them the difference between prescriptive nonfiction and narrative nonfiction. I'm not sure they're aware of that.
What is the difference between narrative and prescription?
Yeah, you've done both. Prescriptive.
I guess so. I don't call it one
Oh yeah,
or the
that's
other. Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point. It's not a particularly common term. Prescriptive is advice. It's here's how I built my business and how you can. So narrative nonfiction is here's how I built my business. In other news, it's that kind of thing.
Okay, got it. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question? Well, maybe you could talk a little bit about. Oh, we have something over. Oh, go.
Yeah, I think this builds off of what his question was, but like, how much of the process do you feel is outlining versus moving forward with what you're writing? I think
That's a
those two
good
questions are
question. My editor hated it because I would never outline in the beginning, and it took me way longer than it should have. But I was like, no, I want to be creative. I want to be organic. And once I learned to outline, I was like, that is really the key. And now, honestly, with AI, that's really, really helpful. I use it for outlining and stuff. It's amazing if you have a great conversation. I'm sure you've talked about AI here and all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah, they're sick of me on the AI.
I know. Well, he's the one you introduced me to AI. Do you remember that?
I remember the
Couple
first
years
time,
ago?
but I remember talking to you about it as I was figuring it out for sure.
I was on a deadline for the book that I just won the award for, and I'd finished the manuscript, and we'd given it to the publishers, and AI had just come out, and the publishers all of a sudden decided it was a heavy, research-heavy book, and the publishers decided at the end that they needed footnotes. I was like, what? How the heck? This is going to take me weeks.
Oh, I
Do you remember that?
exactly now. Yeah,
And you're
exactly
like,
now.
no, it's not. It's going to take you 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And he taught me how to use it, and I was like, oh my God. So, and now of course we use it for everything else and outlining and all that stuff. So yeah, I know that's kind of a long way to answer your question, but the outlining can really help with, I think not with memoir as much as but with prescriptive nonfiction, of course, yeah. Again, it's about where do we need to take what lesson does the reader need to learn in this chapter? What question do I need to answer for the reader? It seems very basic, but that's something that authors always forget, to be reader focused. It's not just about their experience. No one wants to hear that. They want to know how to fix a problem. So, yeah.
Okay. Anybody? Yeah.
Yeah.
You.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So you started with the soccer fiction story,
Yes.
and then you jumped to I'm assuming a nonfiction memoir.
Yes.
And now you've done this prescriptive nonfiction, and it sounds like you're moving into something else where you're writing on your own. Like, what do you like to write? Like, what section and what kind of why?
That's a good question. The book that I just won the award for, I loved because it was a big idea book. It was a thought leadership book. It was called The Conservative Environmentalist. And it was by a young guy who's traveled in an EV all through COVID, all throughout the country, like doing his own hands-on research and learning and investigative reporting about all of the green tech startups and all that stuff, and really figuring out what America needs and and a way to bridge the political divide, how it's a human issue, climate change. It's not a political issue. So he's worked in Washington. And I loved the energy that he brought to the project. He got me so it was contagious. And that's the kind of project I love working on with somebody. We just had such an energy between us. So like the big idea books, but then also memoir. I really love memoir, and I love working on my memoirs, and I want more time to do that. So I've been getting up at like 4 in the morning to do that. It's kind of like now I have 2 careers, the author part and the ghostwriting part. You know this.
I do.
You're very well versed in that, so.
Does involvement vary with clients in terms of like when you're ghostwriting for somebody, are they often like very not involved or overly involved? I feel like there's this misconception about ghostwriters that like,
Definitely.
you know, just a little bit.
That is a great question. Every project is different. Every relationship is different. I became really good friends with someone. I went out to California to visit her. I wrote her memoir. We had a very similar story. We were both moms and divorced and all that stuff. So we got very close, and she ended up hiring my oldest son, and he ended up moving to Northern California to work for her. So that was a very close relationship. Then I have people who just kind of clock it in. They're like, okay, they're very busy. We have a 90-minute Zoom call. Let's get this done. Boom, boom, boom. And within 6 months, that's done. You know, and I never see them again. Sometimes it goes a little south. That's also an issue.
That's when we talk on the phone.
That's when we talk on the phone.
And swear about it to each other.
God, it can be grueling. And the biggest part about the going south thing is you have to have an ironclad contract. So that's something that's super important. Like the business side of this is so important to protect yourself, and that's something I teach other ghostwriters in coaching sessions and stuff like that. Because one of the first projects I had, I didn't have, it was like worth toilet paper, honestly. It was like there were no clauses to protect me. There was nothing that said what would happen if this client did this, this, and this. There was nothing, it was just like no kill fee. I don't know if you guys know what a kill fee is. But if like a project ends for a certain reason, whether you end it or the client ends it, like I would end it if the client if the client weren't compliant, right? Like if I couldn't get the information I needed to finish and meet the deadline, then I could end it. Or if the client was getting abusive, which kind of happened in one situation. So that kill fee is money I'll get no matter what happens. And if the client ends too, I'll get money. My kill fee is a big one because it says I'll get the full amount. Now, other ghostwriters are a little shy and timid to ask for that, but the truth is, it's like I've put that time aside. I haven't looked for any more work for months. Like, it might take me months to get more work. So, you have to protect yourself. That's a big part. But it's all relationships, and it's all like it can go up, it could go down. You never know. I wish I could say I've gotten better at reading signs, but I really haven't. So.
If people are optioning you to write memoirs for them, is there still like a publisher involved and an agent for you, or is that how they get to you to be involved?
That's a good question. There are ghostwriters who work specifically with other, with publishers. Publishers have their favorite people. They go and. I have not gotten to that point, or that's not the path I've gone. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a point, but that's one way you can do it. People tend to find me through referrals, through LinkedIn, through a platform called Reedsy at reedsy.com, and also through Gotham Ghostwriters. We both have used that. That's an like a matchmaking agency. And then what happens is there are 3 pathways, right? They can do the self-publishing, they can do the hybrid press. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that's kind of like an all-service publishing company that it's not like you have to submit, like anyone can use it, but you have to pay for all of their services. You have to pay for the marketing, for the formatting, for all that stuff, and they'll do everything a traditional publisher would do. And then of course there's traditional publishing, and that requires a lot. That requires finding an agent, that requires writing a book proposal, which is like a 30-page business plan for your book. It's convincing people that your book's gonna sell. And so those are the kind of things that we like to help our clients figure out, like which path is best for them. A lot of times it comes down to money, right? Would you say?
Yeah.
It's an investment. So, yeah.
I know you kind of touched on this earlier of like you could be up at 4 a.m. working on something and then doing a bunch of other stuff. What would you say your day-to-day looks like if you're working on multiple projects, if you take multiple at the same time?
Oh my God. Yeah, I don't think you want to know the answer to that. Okay, so like 4 a.m. I get up, the only reason I get up. And then, so I work on my own stuff. I try to give myself the beginning part of the day, because it's kind of like when I can write the best. I'm like in my zone, and my head is clear. And I know that's the opposite for some people, but for me, that's my magic time. And then, so then by like, I would say by 9, you know, the world's starting to buzz. I'm like, oh, I have to get on LinkedIn, because that's a big part of it. You got to market yourself. So that's a whole thing I haven't even talked about, but like, how did I become the ghostwriter's ghostwriter on LinkedIn? I worked my butt off, like doing those posts every day and engaging and all that stuff that we do now for social media. So that's kind of my LinkedIn time, around 9 or 10. And then I kind of like chill for a minute. Maybe I answer some emails, so that's my version of chilling. And then I keep going, and then I'm like, okay, now I've got a client call. Now I've got to write this chapter for this client. I try to do like maybe 2 projects for clients, like 2. I try to take on 2 projects. But lately it's been 1, because I'm writing my own book, and I'm like, I can't. It's just gonna be crazy. I'm gonna fry. Yeah.
So you mentioned you were a new writer and you hadn't really written anything before your soccer book.
Yes.
I'm curious to know like what advice you would give to someone who wants to get into writing, or like any new writers, because I feel like the idea of writing can seem so simple, but there's actually so many things that go into it, and you're
Yes.
way more knowledgeable about that now.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing, like I said before, was even like with the ghostwriting, I found someone. I found someone to help me. And I remembered this, I forgot to share this part. When I was writing that soccer book, guess what happened? I figured out, I don't know how to write about soccer. I don't know enough about soccer to write a good scene about a soccer player and high school and all this, you know. So I hired an editor, or developmental editor, who turned out to be more like a ghostwriter / co-author, and I put his name on the front cover of the book with me. Because, so my point is like, I think in the beginning, you need somebody to help you. Like, I didn't know how to write a speech, so I asked Michael to teach me everything he knew, you know? And so, like, you can't write in a vacuum. I don't care what anybody says. You need to have a mentor, somebody you're looking up to, somebody you're learning from, somebody you're sharing your ideas with. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I would give. Yeah.
Gotta have friends.
You gotta have friends. Even Hemingway had a bottle, so, you know.
If you suffer from imposter syndrome, how did you get over that, or what advice would you give to someone who suffers from that?
That is
Very
a
consistently.
good question. I think we all have it. I think we all always kind of have it. Maybe, do you?
I
He's like,
plead the
not
fifth.
anymore.
I have a
I don't know,
reputation
he's
as a
very
jerk to
confident.
uphold.
I think for the imposter syndrome, that's a good question. How do I get over that?
If you had it, if you didn't, hopefully for you.
No. I definitely feel insecure in moments, but I think what I end up doing, I tend to throw myself in before I know how to do anything. And I do it publicly. And so because of my pride, I don't want to fail. And then it just makes me go and do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, it's a backwards way of doing things, but it keeps me from being still and not doing anything. Like, definitely, like, so that's.
But people seek, this is the thing, and she won't say it, but people seek her out, and then they pay her for her advice, and then it works. And that's a really good way to short circuit that kind of imposter syndrome. They come to you, they seek you out, they give you money, you give them advice, and then they come back and say, it worked, give me more. That's a pretty good way to begin to beat that doubt back.
Yeah. I think if you just stay one step ahead too, like, I think when I was first getting on social media, I remember thinking, who am I to post about this? Some of these people have been doing this 10 years, 20 years. I just started this like 4 or 5 years ago. But I realized we're all learning. So if I just share what I learned yesterday, today, and just share it like I know what I'm talking about, then, you know, that helps somebody, and then they're gonna listen more, and then they're gonna feel more confident. It's kind of like my confidence also will help other people around me. So it's that's kind of my motivation, is like learning, teaching, like we're all in this together kind of thing. So I don't feel so alone being an imposter. We're all faking it until we make it kind of thing, you know.
She went from being basically unknown on that platform to now she's one of the leading figures in Ghostwriter LinkedIn.
Yeah.
There are a handful of people.
Talk
and-
about niche.
Yeah, but I mean, well, and I'm not, don't want to embarrass you, but I mean, you're somebody that you've gone from being, oh, I want to participate to, I wonder if she would possibly participate with us. Like I'm thinking of Jeffrey and his thing and that. It's like, she's now the last person you would say because, oh, well, she's probably too busy. And it happened in what, 3 years basically.
I know.
Yeah, a lot more people know her than know me.
That's true. Yeah. In that realm, at least.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You were right with your first answer. You can just say that's true.
Go.
What would you say is the skill that you have that sets you apart from other ghostwriters? Do you think it is your presence on social media? Do you think it's your relationships with your clients? Or what is it that makes you different from others?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think because I have somehow, I don't know how, I have a business mind, and it's one thing to be a writer and it's one thing to be good at business, but to be both is a tricky thing. And I think what I teach people who want to write books how to think like an author, how to think about their platform before we even write like a word on the page. I'm like, who's your audience? How are we going to market your book? Like I make them think through the questions that they wouldn't ask themselves normally. And I think that's important because then they start to see the big picture. Like, I could write a book for you, but guess what? No one is going to know it's out there. And you might not even write the right book that you need to write. So like I help them to really like pull out what needs to happen, what this manuscript is going to need to look like at the end, and how we're going to get people to listen. Like sometimes I encourage them to start a podcast as we're writing the book, and then that way they'll be interviewing people for more content for the book and more stories, and like so we'll it's like a very holistic approach, I think. Yeah, and you do the same thing. You help them kind of figure out like publishing, like it's one thing to help somebody like give birth to the baby, but like then what do you do with the baby afterwards? And a lot of ghostwriters don't really know that part. They don't know the publishing side of it either. So like we try to help them like figure out their options and what would be the best for their book. So yeah.
Yeah, people think they can hire a ghostwriter and then they get a book. Oh no, there's a whole lot more and a whole lot more money that doesn't go to the ghostwriter, and they have to have that. It's I guess the I hate that phrase, dirty little secret, but the dirty little secret is a very high dollar client thing. If you're a consultant and you're willing to part with something in the mid 5 figures, you can come up with a book or a booklet that you can use to give away and maybe bring in some business. Yeah. But anything other than that, if you're not bringing 6 figures to the table, you're not at least $100,000. You're not going to get the writer. You're certainly not going to get the marketing. You can't do a hybrid deal for anything. This is an elite group of clients, and they don't know it until they're in the middle of it, which is why not every deal closes.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that whole bestseller list thing is also like the dirty secret that most people don't know about. Even ghostwriters don't know about this. So I remember when I first started out, people would ask me, they would be like, so how many bestsellers have you written? And that question scared me because of course I hadn't written any bestsellers yet. And I just hated that question. And then I learned about what it takes to make a bestseller. And guess what it takes? Money. It just takes freaking money. It takes marketing know-how and getting a team together. I wrote a book, you know who this person was. I wrote a book a year and a half ago for this guy who basically had nothing to say. And I even just
There's a lot of that, by the way.
But like he was this young guy, he'd started some businesses, he'd made some money in Germany, and he was like, okay, I want to write a book now and help other entrepreneurs. And I was like, great. And I loved his energy and all that. But then when we sat down to write the book, I was like, he couldn't come up with anything more than just like aphorisms and like sayings and like things that like, it was crazy. And I'm thinking I had to come up with the title, I had to come up with the concept, I had to come up with every lesson he was going to teach. And I thought this is absolutely berserk. And I was living in Spain at the time, and I made him come to Spain. I'm like, we're going to sit down and we're going to be face to face, and maybe then I'll pull something out of you. And it still was kind of bad. And then he discovered AI, and he started feeding me these perfectly written things in AI, and I was like, oh, Ressa, this is good English, because he wasn't even fully fluent in English. And I mean, no, actually he was fluent, but he was not like that good in English. And I was like, this, and he would lie to me. He would lie to me. And he would say, oh yeah, this is just from my notes. And I'm like, okay. And at that point, I always say this, it's GIGO. It's garbage in, garbage out. It's that whole like tech term, right? It's like what you're gonna put in, I'm gonna put out. And I kind of, I'll say this, I shut it off. I was like, okay, that's the energy you're bringing, this is the energy I'm bringing. And crazy enough, he made it to the USA Today bestseller list last month. Did you know this?
I did not.
I was shocked, but I knew why. Because the book sucked. I have to be honest. By the end, I was like, woo. But he made it because he had money. He had money. He had the drive. I think, yeah. So I don't know. I forget what the whole question was, but like, it's a dirty secret, I would say.
I want to mention a thing about, because everybody needs to know about the bestseller list thing.
Yes.
Is I could tell you, my books have sold 500,000. In fact, Dan says I'm miscounting. Anyway, it's even greater. But anyway, we sold a bunch of copies. Okay. The point is, never touched the New York Times bestseller list. Never touched it. But the books I've written have sold more copies than all but 2 or 3 of the books on any given New York Times bestseller list. And that's because the bestseller list is about how many can you sell in a short amount of time.
Yeah, a certain amount.
And if you can sell 50,000 books in a week, you're on.
Yes.
If you can sell 50,000 books in a week, I've sold 500,000 books, but it took 8 years. I made more money, but they got the bestseller list. So saying you want a bestseller is shorthand for I don't really understand how publishing works. Okay, fair.
That's right. And Amazon, you're always a bestseller for a minute.
Oh
like,
yeah, in your
as soon as your
category
book
at
hits,
least.
you're like, you make it to the top, and then you start to go down, right? So anyone can say they're a bestseller. It's a whole like sham, I would
Racket.
say.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is a
It's
racket.
like Michelin stars.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not,
It was developed by the tire industry to get people to travel to these
really?
different
I
locations.
didn't know that. Okay.
That's where that comes from.
Guess that explains why I'm paying $150 for a leg of lamb. Okay. Anybody else have a thought? Yes.
So you said, basically like money and drive. Is that money specifically what you're paying for, like marketing, just getting your foot in the door to certain events? Like what kind of conceptualize that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are different kind of packages you could do and different things. So the money part, the big part of it is bulk buying.
Yes.
Getting people to bulk buy your books. And there are companies out there that make it look natural. And they go and they actually have people go to stores and buy some of the books. And then, so that's one big part of it, right? And then there are other things, you can pay for great reviews, like they can, what's the other
Kirkus
thing?
reviews are purchased.
Kirkus reviews are purchased. Then going to events, getting into, or creating a launch event with companies that promise certain people at the event. It's like a whole big thing. Like if you pay $100,000 for that event, you'll get a certain amount of PR and people there. Yeah.
Do you know how you get your book on that table in the front of Barnes & Noble?
Pay for it.
That's how we got there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, our publisher sprung for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is whatever romance, if you had any romance about the publishing industry, just part with it. It is like everything else. It's a racket.
It is.
You can certainly do well, but anyway,
Yeah.
this is yours. So.
And the thing is, so now I'm like figuring out, okay, what am I going to do as an author to get my book out there? I don't have this money to spend. I don't have like $500,000. So that's the other part of it now that I'm trying to figure out is building that author brand. And one thing I'm doing is starting a podcast. One thing I'm doing is the Substack, like putting pieces of my memoir out on Substack and picking out what part of my memoir is interesting and that is digestible, that people are hungry for. And the part is that I was in a cult for 12 years. So that's a whole other story that I can share. Not tonight, but but the point is like figuring out what people need to hear and want to hear, putting that first, and then just talking the hell out of it. Like, that's what my podcast is going to be. It's called No One Joins a Cult. And I'm going to interview people all about cults that they were in, what is a cult. It's going to be a big like thought leadership thing. And I figured, let me get my name out there, let me get conversations going, and kind of build some of that authority. Even though the cult part is like this much of my memoir, but I'm making it the big part now. So it's like, it's always thinking about the market. It's thinking about what people want, what they need, what they want to read.
Would you talk, and if you don't, just say you don't want to, but would you talk a little about it, about the cult thing? Because it's so
You
compelling.
tease that out there.
Yeah, people don't get to hear about it, and I've read what she's written, and there's a dozen things you could just leap on, but I don't want, just maybe just to mention.
Yeah.
a
Okay,
little.
sure, of course. So I was 15, living in New York City. I was actually going to high school at a private school with this gentleman here who's holding the camera. And my best friend was 2.5 years older. She was going to performing arts high school, and the one in Fame, and or maybe you guys are all too young for that, but anyway, her family. I kind of adopted myself into her family. I grew up with a single mom. I didn't really have family. She was busy a lot, and I was like, this is a Midwest family living in Manhattan with 5 kids, and someone was always home, and I was one of them now. And so I adopted myself into that family, and then they started going to this church, and then the church turned out to be a cult. It was called the International Churches of Christ, and they had a whole series of Bible studies that they did with you, and it was like a whole kind of regimented way to bring you in. So I got baptized into that when I was 15 and a half. And I always say the reason my podcast is called No One Joins a Cult is because I always say no one joins a cult, they just take too long leaving. Because you don't know it. You just don't know it. You're just in it all of a sudden. And it can happen almost to anybody. And so I talk about that in my Substack. I have a whole eight part series about how they indoctrinated you and kind of how they started to it's a whole system that they do. They kind of pull you away from your familiar circles, your family, your friends. They play around a lot with the Bible and the scriptures, and have this form this rhetoric and this form of logic, like, okay, if this happened in the Bible, and if Jesus says this, then that means this, and therefore that it's like this weird logic, and you can't argue with it, no matter how smart you are. It's a weird thing that goes on, and then they prey on your desire to do good and your desire to have family and community. And so before I know it, and that was a big thing for me, is I didn't really have much family. So all of a sudden they're helping me study for my SATs. They're doing this, they're doing that, and before you know it, you're roped in, and all your friends in school think you're weird now, so you can't go back to them. So it was just this whole kind of thing that happened, and I write about it a lot. But so I was in that for 12 years, and I also got very sick when I was in the cult, and I ended up in a wheelchair for a while, and it was just it was so draining having to go to everything and be there all the time, be on. Our whole job was to go seek and save the lost. That's what we called it, and every time I was on a subway, I had to, if I wouldn't talk to the person next to me and invite them to church, I was in sin. What was I doing with my time? I was being selfish. They're going to hell. It was this pressure all the time, and my body broke down by the time I was 22. I got married when I was 20, and so by the time I was 22, I was working at St. Martin's Press, my first publishing job. No, actually I was working at DK Publishing, my second one, and I couldn't go back to work. I got up one morning, I was supposed to go to church, and I couldn't walk. My knees swelled up so badly. And I went to doctors, I went all over the place. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And then one day, somebody handed me a card for a psychiatrist, and I was I was so insulted. I was I'm not making this up. I couldn't understand what they meant. And I was in the church, and the church didn't believe in therapy. So it was if I went to a therapist, that would have been kind of sinful. So for a long time, I still didn't know what was going on. And I got better eventually, slowly, after like years of like fatigue and aches, and all of a sudden, like, you know, I'm healthy again, and I started grad school, and then I started going to therapy, and then I started figuring out, oh, this is not healthy. And then I finally left the church. So that's kind of the whole trajectory. But at the same time, the church was also kind of imploding. There was a whole controversy that happened. Things were getting exposed. You know, all the typical things: sex, money, drugs, all that stuff was being exposed in the church. So,
Can I ask how long that took? Because, I mean, Cialdini's done that. Like, I don't know if you've read The Power of Persuasion by Cialdini.
Yes.
He talks about,
I
like,
haven't read it, but I know
it's.
it.
I mean, he uses this example of a cult where he's like, we put some people in there, and we thought the world was going to end on the first, and they were, you know, what is that going to do to them?
Yes.
We think their faith is going to be crushed. Long story short, their faith was much stronger because they, like, you know, well, our faith was actually so strong that God changed, blah, 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 right? Because they're so deep into it.
Yeah.
So, obviously, some other things happen that let you kind of get out of that, but how long did that whole process take?
From the time I started suspecting like something was fishy.
Yeah.
Let's see. I was in grad school. Okay, I would say 2 years, and during that time, I finished grad school. I had a baby, so there was a lot happening internally in me, like awakenings, if you want to say, like really figuring out where's my life going. And now I had this baby to protect, and I started not feeling safe for this baby, like, you know, and so it took about 2 years, I would say. Yeah.
Is it still up and running?
That's a good question.
I think
Yes.
so,
So a version of it is, and I still know a few people who are in it, and they swear that it's different. They swear, I don't know. To me, I still see a lot of the unhealthiness there. Yeah.
So, because when you mentioned that when you were in that and you felt like if you didn't approach someone, that I've been approached and like so I'm Catholic myself, so
Yeah.
I have, you know, but they said that it was like a church that focuses specifically in the Passover aspect.
Oh.
I don't know.
No, I
I
don't
didn't
know.
have this in my mind, but
There are a lot out there. Yeah.
So that's why I asked.
But it's really funny because, like, more often than you would think, people have said, "Oh, I've been approached by the ICOC specifically." Like, we were everywhere. We were good at what we did. We were really good at what we did. Yeah.
Have you found that writing about this experience has been cathartic, or does any part of you feel like, because this is sort of what the storyline you're using to pull the rest of your book forward, how does it, sorry, I'm not articulating my question very well, but how does it sit with you writing about that experience, knowing that it doesn't entirely define you in your entire book,
Yes.
even though that's what you're using?
It's tricky. So I've been getting messages on Facebook from people first, people who are very grateful that I'm writing about it because they are still healing. I feel like I've done most of my healing. Like, I'm not writing to heal, but it's helping other people, so that's really encouraging. But then I'm also getting messages, and in fact today I got a message from someone who was like, "I'm so sorry that was your experience. I didn't know, you always looked so happy. That wasn't my experience." And obviously she's still in it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny, like, and those people are always like, she said, "I'm praying for you to heal." And I'm like, oh, I just want to, like, it makes me crazy. Yeah, it drives me crazy. And instead what I did was I was like, oh, well, if you ever want to be on my podcast, you can definitely talk about your experience. And that was it. So it's funny, these reactions, yeah.
Anyone else?
Can I ask the obvious question?
Yeah.
What do we got going on here? What are we filming for?
Oh, well, LinkedIn. Let's
Perfect.
put it that way.
Okay.
That's in action, me building my author platform. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. What, can I ask you guys a question? Because we were having an interesting discussion in the car about this. What do you call a cult? What would you say defines a cult?
Well, I was surprised to hear you mention that you were in grad school, your first job, your second job. I feel like there's this misconception of a cult is like, I don't know, like a commune when you're all like physically isolated from people as well as mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I would define like a cult, something that's like physically isolating as well as emotionally.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I think everyone has their own definition. That's why I'm so curious. Like, if anybody else, what do you guys think?
I feel like once you, like, you know, like religion, there's a foundation, but once you start to build upon that foundation and like start twisting it, I feel like that's when things get, you know, construed. You can have your own thought processes and your opinions about that, you know, foundation that's already been established, but once you start to build upon the foundation, I feel like is when, you know, it's like slippery
Yeah.
slope.
Yeah, it's interesting. What about you?
I think it can have to do with too, like, once you start using like religion and religious aspects to create a different narrative that's self-serving to a specific group of people. So, like,
Yeah, well, they often say that at the heart of every cult, or I don't know if you want to call it the heart or the bowels, but there's like a megalomaniac, like a person who is narcissistic or self-serving, right? There's this agenda that this person has that he needs, or she, but a lot of times it's he, that they need to put, you know, their people around them to support them and make them feel powerful and strong. So that's a really great point. Do you think it's always religious? I mean, a cult is not always religious, right?
That's just the easy. I mean, that's the easy example. And so I was a theology major.
Okay.
And I'm not religious at all anymore. And I would almost say like almost every religion has like cultish aspects to it. And how you define that is such a slippery thing. Like the manipulation. Like, I mean, within the Christian faith, there's thousands of different sects that all translate and manipulate things in kind of their own way. And I'm using the word manipulate. Not everybody has to use that, and that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be that. It can be also just, I think it focuses on a way of life, though.
Yeah.
Whether it's ideological or sociological, but religious, so easy to see.
Yeah, I mean, what else besides religion do you think could be a cult? I mean, I think sometimes gyms can be cults.
Oh yeah.
Right? But why? Why do we all say yes? Like, what is it? What is it about a certain gym or a yoga practice or something? Like, when does it get to be like?
When the community
It's like
becomes
the guidelines
toxic.
of it too. Like there's the strict rules and like the expectations. Like you gotta keep doing this. You gotta keep going.
Yes.
You can't leave because it's gonna ruin what you've worked so hard on. Like you gotta keep coming back.
So maybe the consequences for leaving it.
Yeah.
Or
That's a
you
good
can't
one.
leave. Some don't let you leave. You have to go in person back and actually sign the contract. Some don't let you leave.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I feel like when it like ties to your mental health and it's like almost like a hyperfixation on your mental health, and maybe if it like the person who's like kind of imposing these ideologies on you, whether it's like religious or something else, when it starts to dive into your personal life and like your personal morals and values, it's like you don't even realize you're being manipulated in real time. And so I think it's interesting that like there are some cults that aren't related to religion at all, but it's just maybe people who have like past traumas or like personal issues, and they take that and they completely like twist it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's strangely weird it's just weird to see.
Well, what's interesting, when you were talking, I was thinking about it, it disrupts your ecosystem, right? And the people around you, if they're reacting strangely to what you're doing, that's something to take notice of. These people who've known you for a while, and all of a sudden you're behaving differently. It could be a toxic relationship, an abusive relationship. It could be, you know what I mean? Like, but when it's disrupting the people around you too, and they're starting to notice, oh, you're behaving a little differently, or like, what's going on here? And it's like, it's a lot all at once. I think, I don't know. I think that's a sign maybe that something's off. That it's like changing the balance in who you are. Yeah.
This kind of touches on what we're discussing right now, but there's a book you may be familiar with called Cultish.
Yes,
which,
I have that on my nightstand.
Yeah, it's sort of, I mean, well, you're familiar with it then, but it discusses this.
I haven't read the
exact
whole thing.
idea. No, it's really good. It just kind of talks about different communities that, while applying this sort of nebulous label to what defines a cult, can incorporate lots of different organizations. I mean, the military's touched on, military spouses as well, CrossFit, all of those things are discussed. in that book. It's really interesting.
And it talks about language in that book too.
Yeah.
That's an important part. Like in my church, I think I could come up with a list of like 50 to 100 words that we used exclusively in our church. Like it was our terminology. It was like from like that brother fell away. That means like he left the church. Or like she's weak. What does that mean exactly? Like, oh, she's a weak sister. Or I forget. Like there were all these things like that we would say, and when you start to build this vocabulary and language that's exclusive to a group, that's also very strengthening in the group. I mean, we create language, like nations are created over languages, right? So it's the same kind of thing. So that was one factor that I noticed, and I think a lot of people like in like CrossFit or like all these things, like there's a lingo involved in the culture, right? And I'm not saying it's always bad, but if it starts to become exclusive and blocking other people out, I think that could be dangerous.
So how do you differentiate between a group and a cult? Because
well, that's what I'm trying to figure out now. That's
well,
what I'm asking you.
I was asking the expert. You know, how do you differentiate
well, here's the
it?
thing. I'm not the expert, but I'm curious, and so I love these discussions. I know from my experience what felt like a cult. But I think everyone has their different experiences. I do think there are certain key factors among most of the cults, the common threads, and like the lingo, the disruption of your family, and like, you know, all involvement, saying no, not being able to leave, right? Like saying no to your own moral compass for certain things. There's like a cognitive dissonance too, where you're starting to do things that don't jive with, like things don't make sense, like. And then you come up with your own logic to make sense of what's making sense, what's not making sense. Does that make, like, I'm trying to think of an example, but there's this.
You see it in the political discourse on both sides.
Yeah. Anyway, I know we're going off course, but.
No, this is fine. I wanted to say that from a psychological standpoint, the thing that occurs to me is that you have, if we start with a premise, the premise is that you are an independent agent, okay, and your identity is ultimately your choice. And someone who wants to have control over you will try to attach some other external actor to your identity. And if that becomes, once that becomes integral to you, once you've surrendered a portion of your identity to the external actor, then that external actor can invite other external actors and impose all sorts of things by way of language, for instance, by way of behaviors and rituals, and all of a sudden your agency remains. Your agency absolutely remains, but you have surrendered. You've decided that the feeling of this agency is more important than true agency, the feeling of this artificial agency. So here you are, I like the way I feel, whether I feel protected or less guilty or whatever, and that comes from being attached to these other things. And you can walk away anytime, but to do that means you have to unburden yourself of the attachment of the external actors, and that's where the glue happens.
That attachment, that's an important factor.
Yeah, external actors attached to the identity, I think is.
Yeah. One thing that the church did was, one of the studies they had us do was confessing all of our sins. Like we had to like make lists and come to the study. And I mean, I was 15, I didn't have that many sins, but like, I guess you have some. But like the point is they put you in this vulnerable place. And so afterwards you do feel attached to whoever you just shared all of this information with. So that's a good point. Yeah. Wow.
Anybody else?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Sorry I was late.
We'll take a break and let Salwa and Richard get their things together, and then we'll pick up around 6:40, 6:45, and we'll see what sort of mischief we can make here in the Colbert Mike.
Thank you.